Hub,
and Spoke. Audio Collective.
Hey guys, it's Mike Rogie from Mountain Gazette.
This is Kat Craddock from Sever.
And we have both been on this podcast feed, and this is the Best of Summer series. You should subscribe to Kat's magazine.
You should subscribe to Mike's magazine.
There you go. That's our ad. Ads are dumb. Magazines are sweet. Enjoy the pod.
Control is new from Commercial Type, originally drawn for interview by Christian Schwartz and Miguel Reyes. This sans serif is designed for flexibility and can bring tasteful modernism or 70s tight-knot touching exuberance to any layout. See Control and download a free trial version at commercialtype.com.
And I also think because it was satirical and we were making fun of people, we wanted it to stick. We didn't want it to be, oh, yeah, that was a funny joke about this person. Oh, that was a funny nickname for this person or whatever. We wanted to have an impact.
This is Print is Dead, Long Live Print, a podcast about magazines and the people who made and make them. I'm Deborah Bishop.
I'm George Gendron.
I'm Patrick Mitchell. We've always had a thing for magazine launches. They're filled with drama and melodrama, people behaving with passion and conviction, and people misbehaving. Anything to get that first issue onto the stands and into the hands of readers. Some new ventures seem to sneak in the back door. Who saw Wired or Fast Company coming? Others are to the manner born and from the most elite print parents. But even with that pedigree, they never gain traction, never display the scrappiness and experimentation that we've come to expect from anything new. You know who you are. But then, one day, along comes the greatest startup in the history of magazine startups. A magazine that dares to mercilessly and humorously vilify high society. The one that big-time journalists pretend to ignore but were first to the newsstand each month to grab their copy. The one that created packaging conceits separated at birth, private lives of public enemies, Blurb-o-mat, and Naked City, plus the adorable nicknames like Short-Fingered Vulgarian that persist to this day. That's right, we're talking about Spy. And in this episode, we'll meet Kurt Andersen, who, along with Graydon Carter and Tom Phillips, founded what became an instantaneous cultural phenomenon, Spy magazine. The axis of the publishing world tilted when it hit the stands. Spy was the most influential magazine of the 1980s, the author Dave Eggers wrote. It definitely changed the whole tone of magazine journalism. It was cruel, brilliant, beautifully written, and perfectly designed, and feared by all. There had never been anything like Spy before. Nothing since has come close.
So let me just start by jumping in. What was the very first conversation you had with Graydon Carter about a new magazine? When was that?
It was probably 1984. It's my best guess. You know, we'd become friends. I'd arrived at Time magazine 3 years earlier, and we'd become very good friends. And it may have been earlier than that, but I distinctly remember some lunches in 1984 where we were talking about this unnamed new magazine that we would love to have. It didn't begin as a conversation of, oh, let's start a magazine. It began as, wow, we loved magazines when we were young. What do we miss? What isn't there now that could be?
Say more about that. What was, from your point of view and Graydon's, what was the state of the magazine industry at that point?
Well, we were still young enough to be dissatisfied and want to cause trouble, but had been around enough at that point. You know, I was 30 and he was old. He was 35. And, you know, I guess we felt everything was safe and kind of fat and happy and unambitious. And, you know, that basically a kind of, what I remember in our prospectus that we then, once it became like, yeah, let's see if we can do this, and started writing it up. We called it, one of the terms we used was illiterate sensationalism. We thought that, you know, it was possible to be, well, the motto we came up with was smart, fun, funny, fearless. And so we thought it was possible to be smart and thoughtful, but like no holds barred and shocking and in a kind of non-ideological way. We thought that, you know, again, we'd been around long enough and hanging around with reporters and journalists long enough that we realized you hear all the great stories at the bar and never see them in print effectively. And we thought like, well, why? Why can't we put them in print? And so that's what. And we also, there was afoot, a kind of humorous, ironic, comedic zeitgeist change. The David Letterman show was part of that. Maureen Dowd as a reporter was part of that. There are other things happening, and we were part of that wave, I suppose, in imagining this magazine that would be both satirical, but not in any sense a humor magazine, different than Private Eye in Britain, which was a kind of predecessor, but very different than what we ended up doing. So, I mean, the old Esquire had been very important to both of us. The National Lampoon back in the day, again, a pure humor magazine, not journalistic at all, but that had, shaped us, and certainly Mad Magazine when we were children. But bits of Harper's, and again, the old days, these magazines of the 70s, really, 60s and 70s, when we were young, had made us fall in love with magazines, and that didn't seem to be being done much. I mean, Esquire had its annual Dubious Achievements Awards, which was creditable and okay, but once a year, a big piece once a year. So we felt there was room to move.
What's your theory, looking back, on why magazines were as, well, I'll use the word bland? I think at one point you guys said in the book about Spy, one of you was quoted as saying something about the fact that they had lost their edge. They didn't really have a personality. You have a theory? Was that a response to or a reflection of the culture at large, or was that more to do with the life cycle of individual magazines?
Both, I would say, and also generational. I think there was something about the baby boom generation when they were still young and not yet old, but coming of age, right? I mean, as I say, I was 30, Graydon was 35. The kind of anti-establishment, fuck you-ness of our generational sensibility had not really made its way into magazines. And and this is more, not even generational or the spirit of the time so much as, in Great Britain, I mean, there's lots of things wrong with British journalism and always has been, but there was an ability to kick people in the shins that was lacking in the United States, so that as well. And, I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, magazines were long in the tooth and old. But on the other hand, in retrospect, I often think that, among other things, Spy was representative of or embodied a kind of late magazine age thing. Now, we didn't know it was late in the magazine age in 1986 because we didn't know it was about to happen. But in a certain way, it was this kind of flourishing of magazines late in the magazine century, if you will. And I know it's true of us, and I think it was true of all these other little magazines that started in New York around the same time, and 7 Days and all these other things. There was suddenly, starting in 1982, when, New York was back and booming and there was money sloshing around because of the bull market, there was a lot of money for kind of angel investors to throw around to enterprises like ours. So that, I think, permitted these uppity young people to try to do it in a different way than it was being done by the big Time Inc. Condé Nast entities. But I guess back to your question, I mean, yes, these big dominant magazine companies like Time Inc. and Condé Nast were dominant, and by their nature, right, by their corporate nature, weren't going to do a lot of risky things.
What were you and Graydon both doing at the time? Were you both at Time Magazine?
I was still at Time Magazine. He, by that time, had gone to become an editor of a startup called TV Cable Week, which didn't last.
Oh, my God.
Yes, right? Which was meant to be, was a Time Inc. magazine, meant to be the kind of TV guide of the new cable era. And it was, a big failure. And so he was involved in that startup, did his job, but was really focused on Spy. And we, as we've talked about from the beginning, and we used the infrastructure of Time Inc., the library, as it used to be called back then in the 19th century, Watts lines for free long distance, and all these, we used the means at our disposal to to do our little startup in our offices at Time Inc.
So at some point, this transforms from a conversation about the magazine you'd both love to read to one that, well, maybe you guys were going to launch this.
Yeah.
And I've been told that you started swapping notes about the magazine.
We did. We didn't. What made us start to do that and take it more seriously than just, the sixth lunch where we were talking about this larkish thing that we would want. My wife, who was then working at Sesame Street, yes, she was, or maybe had just went to CBS. Anyway, she was working, and one of her friends from college was this guy, Tom Phillips, who we'd never met. And I knew, maybe I met him, but I didn't know him well. She said, you guys need a third person. You guys need a business partner. Let me introduce you to Tom. Maybe you'll like him. Maybe he'll be into it. And he was, and he became our third partner and had beyond his business chops. He worked on Wall Street and had an MBA. He having an outsider pushing us to like, hey, get serious, write ideas, start memorializing this and figuring it out. And that's really what started making it real,
What's interesting about that is in the industry, when you hear the title publisher, it connotes, well, he's the ad sales guy. He runs the ad team. Yeah. And yet, almost every single startup needs somebody who has this kind of infinite capacity to get shit done.
Yeah.
And to get other people to get stuff done.
Yes.
And it seems as if that was the key role he played for you guys.
It was a very key role. And again, it made for a complementarity of, yes, we were two buddies and pals and the creative whatevers, to have this other person who could do the stuff and set up the meetings and raise the money and all that, and who liked us and would completely shared the mission of the thing. He wasn't in it because it was a job, or he was in it. We created a little cult, right? Well, it was a mission-oriented operation, and he wasn't really the guy who sold ads that much. He was everything else. As we were starting, we realized, well, we need somebody to sell ads. He hired my wife, Ann Kramer, to be the ad director, marketing director, and she, in that sense, along with our early editors, became a kind of co-founder.
And when it comes to selling, where are you on the spectrum? A lot of creatives they don't like to sell. They don't mind going into an environment with a client or an agency where they're going to talk about the market or the culture at large. But man, we don't like asking for the business. We don't like closing a deal, God forbid.
No, we I mean, again, my wife was the person, so we were able to work it out pretty well. And I remember once, actually, we'd gone on to St. Louis to sell Anheuser-Busch, and we didn't announce that we were married. We have different names. And at the end, the guy said, or somebody said, wow, I've never seen an editor and an ad director get along so well and be in such sync. At that point, we admitted it. But I didn't go out and sell. I was happy to be a kind of, show up and be interested in this business or whatever at the appropriate time, a kind of pre-closing appearance. I was totally happy to be used that way. And so was Graydon, for that matter. And of course, raising money was, the first important series of selling the thing.
Right,
so,
of course. Where'd the name come from?
It was Graydon's idea, and it was from the play and film Philadelphia Story, in which Jimmy Stewart works for Spy magazine, and Graydon always wanted to live in the 1930s and 40s, and that was another way we could do it. And that's where it came from, and it was it worked out great, and among other things, allowed to have it be a gigantic logo on the cover, and that was entirely his idea.
It broadcasts a certain kind of attitude that the title TV Cable Week just doesn't.
It's true. Although unfortunately, there were always people who thought like, so it's about espionage or it's about intelligence. No,
that's okay.
But yeah. Well, yeah, and occasionally it was. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's interesting that in reading the excerpts in what was it, Funny Years?
Yeah,
in the book about Spy, reading the excerpts that I think are all Graydon's and the notes he was sending to you. You guys got to a certain point where it seemed as if the conversation about this new magazine was all about style, attitude, intelligence, sensibility.
Sure, on top of a commitment to rigorous reporting and research.
Well, that was my next question.
Yeah.
So where did that come from?
Where did which come from?
This unbelievable, almost maniacal
Yes.
focus on reporting. The reason I ask, here's what it's of interest to me in particular. I was at New York Magazine in the early 70s, and I was really struck as I moved through my career how influential the new journalism, some of which was Esquire, the Trib,
In New York.
and New York, how influential it was among young journalists who somehow misinterpreted it and didn't understand that the foundation of this was a kind of relentless reporting and attention to observational detail. I mean, it was extraordinary.
Yes.
And when I think about that, the other magazine that I think about was Spy.
Oh, that's nice. Well, no, I mean, I mentioned the magazines I mentioned, but the new journalists, I mean, Nora Ephron, Joan Didion for that matter, Tom Wolfe, Jay Talese, all of them obviously were reporters first who also had these amazing sensibilities and prose styles, right? So yes, absolutely, 100%.
And you, in both magazines, you began to realize quickly those details matter. They broadcast something about the characters of the stories.
Yes. And I also think because it was satirical, right? And we were making fun of people, we wanted it to stick. We didn't want it to be, oh yeah, that was a funny joke about this person. Oh, that was a funny nickname for this person or whatever. We wanted to have an impact, and you only do that by, giving new information. Yes, in a new way. And yes, stylishly. And God knows I think our art direction was key to the whole operation in a big way. But yeah, it is reporting driven. And again, that was what was new. I mean, people were familiar with humor and satire, National Lampoon and so forth. But that combination was rarer, although one of our predecessors that nobody realized certainly by then, but we had because we looked back at old magazines, the New Yorker back in its beginnings.
Yeah.
And it's not right at the beginning, but like Wolcott Gibbs in the 30s and stuff. Those were spy stories, essentially, that they were doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. You were talking earlier about the zeitgeist. And I guess what interests me about the angel money that you raised was that it came from very conservative sources. The heirs of Merrill Lynch, Coca-Cola, Conagra. I mean, one of the big Wall Street.
You've done your research. Yes.
I have done my research.
Yeah. Well, conservative, not in that they are political conservatives.
No. I didn't mean it that way.
I know. No, but so much of it was was rich people we happen to know and to whom 50,000 was not a huge deal, especially 4 years into this new bull market, So yeah, they were mostly friends of ours, of Tom's and mine especially, and a little bit from my parents as well, and a bit, but again, a little bit, and they're not rich people at all. So, but yes, conservative in the sense of one's parents in Nebraska, yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's what I was really getting at. But it also says something about kind of maybe the last days of magazines having that kind of cachet.
For sure, and I think in a way, again, by sheer fortuitous chance, we lucked into doing this at a moment of, in some ways, maximum glamminess of magazines as a thing.
Yeah.
Right. Vanity Fair had been revived / started, in 1982, I think. So yeah, it was, magazines were a glamour, in some ways, the most glamorous part of the glamorous New York media industry at that moment. Yeah.
Having run Inc. magazine for decades, I have to ask the question, what did you guys take around with you when you were pitching investors? Do you have a prospectus, business plan? Do you have a prototype?
We had all those things. The prototype was boards, like, 6 boards of here's how it'll look, here's what the covers will look like. But yeah, a prospectus, and somewhere in some archive I still have that. And we had a business plan as well. And like all business plans, it was like, fiction. But plausible fiction.
Still have a copy of it?
Of the business plan, I don't think so. Tom Phillips probably does, but I do not.
Boy, I'd love to take a look at that. I love looking at old business plans.
Again, it wasn't crazy, and we had the business as conceived and in the business plan, and was modest. It was our initial subtitle was Spy, the New York Monthly. We weren't trying to be a national magazine. It's our little version. I mean, we really saw in our direct mail. We sent out direct mail. I guess maybe they're still direct mail, but we sent out direct mail, junk mail, and tried to make it funny and compared ourselves on this little card to New York and the New Yorker and the New York Times. So we thought of ourselves as the little scruffy commandos in New York. But my real point is that we didn't think, oh, we'll be a national magazine and sell 1 million copies. We thought, no, we'll be a New York magazine. And I think, I don't know what we projected as a circulation, but I'm sure we exceeded it. I mean, I know what our circulation was at the top, and I'm sure we didn't say we'll have 300,000 circulation in 3 years, and we did.
Yeah, that was extraordinary.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Print is Dead is made possible with the support of MagCulture. Read our online journal, listen to our podcast, and visit our shop to discover why we're convinced print is very much alive. All available at magculture.com.
So you guys raise some money, and then you go out and you rent an office.
Yeah.
And appropriately enough, the Puck built.
Yeah. We did. Well, it's funny. Even before when we were just still talking about it and dreaming about it, and Green and I were having lunch, we would have lunch in Times Square and play Asteroids, the video game Asteroids, in one of these playlands after lunch. And then we walked back to Time Inc. I literally remember we were looking up at buildings, and we looked up at one old building. And one of us said, probably Graydon said, that's the kind of place where we could have these offices for this magazine. It'll be like our clubhouse. And, and I'm not even sure we knew about the Puck building at that point, but as soon as we discovered it, which had recently been renovated, right? And there weren't many tenants yet. Of course, it was the home of this famous satirical magazine a century earlier. But as soon as we saw that building, and it was in Soho, but a kind of grungy edge of Soho, and it was a beautiful little building, and it was just kismet. We had to be there, and it was cheap. It was super cheap.
Not anymore.
Oh, no, not now that Jared Kushner owns it. No, not anymore. Although recently I discovered, and I didn't realize it then, that Jared Kushner's father was already an investor in it when we were there, which adds to the something, my retroactive amazement of my various connections with Donald Trump and his family.
Yeah, boy, but that's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I thought the Kushners were a relatively recent.
Me too. But no, I mean, they weren't the owners then, but they were part of a group that I think had just right around that time. We certainly occupied the Puck building when the future inmate, Mr. Kushner, was part of the investor group who owned it.
Boy, you just can't kick the habit, can you?
No.
It might interest you to know, you and your wife, that there's a nice, tidy little penthouse for sale on one of the top floors of the Puck building for a mere $42 million. If you're feeling nostalgic.
Well, it's funny when they opened that, and Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump were the doyens of that whole operation, and I know they had that apartment. I don't know if it's their apartment, but Spy was, I believe, on the 8th floor, and it was 9th floor. So I always wonder, are they living in my office now? But yes, indeed, I'm aware of that availability.
Did you guys go into the office every day?
Oh, yeah. No, we worked remotely. Yes, of course we went.
No, I was just curious about work habits back then.
Oh,
right?
we were
especially for our younger listeners here.
No, we were. It was the hardest job. I mean, time had its hardness. 2 nights a week too. But man, no, we worked long, hard hours there. Absolutely. Although it's interesting, and I remember I felt like I was working every waking hour, but we didn't go into the office much on weekends. But yes, we worked hard. We went to the office. Showed up at whatever we showed up at. 8 or 9, and we're there until after dark.
Was it what we would call a newsroomish environment?
It was open plan, which we never called it that, but it was just a big loft with some, kind of cool partitions that our architect friends had put up. And, it was just this, whatever it was, 3,000 square feet, with an increasing number of people just running around, screaming at each other in sight of each other all the time. It was great.
Yeah, and now we're getting to something that really interests me, which is the relationship between spaces and how people end up working.
Yeah.
I mean, I got so just hooked on the newsroom at New York Magazine, particularly in the old, at 32nd Street, which eventually became the Pushpin building. But man, there was just something about that kind of energy and buzz when you could have all these conversations. You could sit, and as a young kid, for me, I had been the mailboy there. And when I moved up to the newsroom, I felt like, man, I could just sit and listen every day and kind of
100%. No,
and learn.
Totally. And it's funny that you mentioned New York Magazine, because when I went on to New York Magazine after Spy at a different location on 45th First Street, I guess it was.
Yeah, by the Daily News.
Yeah, exactly. And there was the editor's office, which I occupied, was this big, closed off, like wood panel thing. I kind of hated that, and I at one point proposed, like, can't we just tear this wall down here? But I totally agree. It's, again, I don't want to be the old fogey back. And back then it was great because of this. But the fact that, nobody wore headphones or earphones, and they actually talk, it wasn't all these people, all these Dilberts in their cubicles just typing away alone. There was a communality by the nature of not having, we had computers. That was avant-garde in 1986.
Boy, it wasn't ever.
But it wasn't, it was a lively office culture, as you say, newsroomy, in which everybody sort of experienced together all the time. It was great.
One of the other things I loved about it was at least the illusion, and it might have been an illusion for a young kid, that, man, it was hard to keep a secret in your newsroom.
Yeah.
Everybody knew everything.
It was hard to keep a secret. The other thing that, I don't know, you might bring this up, but it just occurred to me in terms of not only did we have serious work ethic happening there, but, for a magazine that was mean, and like, I remember when the Wall Street Journal of all places accused us of being too mean, but it was the opposite, mostly, in the office. It was a very collegial, we happy band of sisters and brothers thing, which was, I think, an important part of this, scary operation we were doing.
I'm really curious, where did story ideas come from?
All the usual places, which is everywhere, and everybody hears everything. But we had, regular, I don't even know how often, frequent editorial meetings. We often with lunch, and we would just gather around, and people bringing sandwiches, and the whole 15-person editorial staff would gather around a table and say, "Oh, I have this idea," or "I have this." They were such magnificent, wonderful, exciting meetings, and yes, Greg and I were in charge, but it was a pretty democratic, jazz-like improvisational thing. It was wonderful. And again, having had a subsequent life of going to meetings that weren't so fun or exciting or jazz-like, it was one of those things that, in retrospect, I certainly realized, man, I didn't know quite how good I had it. But yeah, so they were editorial meetings, and they were, and that's, once we were doing this thing, once people understood what it was we were doing, which they didn't at first. And one of the reasons, sorry, I'm digressing to this, but
no, I'm not.
One of the reasons we did so much editing from the beginning, it was a highly edited magazine, was not because we wanted to piss on everything or get our hands on everything, but because what we were doing was kind of a new thing that people didn't, we couldn't point to, oh, it's like this, do it like this. We had to be around for 6 months or so before even writers, let alone everybody else, could say, oh, I get it. I get what you're trying to do. So that's what, I mean, in a way, when you said it was about sensibility and style and all that, and we certainly had a house style or a set of house styles for sure, but it didn't begin. We had a vision, and then it took a while for the rest of the world and our staff and outside writers to sort of come along.
One thing that was absolutely remarkable for me as a reader was that there was more going on per square inch on a page of Spy than anything I had ever seen before, ever. And so as a reader, it was literally a miracle, a conceptual miracle. On the other hand, I kept thinking, how in God's name do you guys do this without just burning out?
Well, I take that as a great compliment. And many of my friends at magazines at the time were struck, as you were, by especially if you do that for a living, you are aware of how much of the person hours per square inch, that went into this. And, we didn't have any bosses, right? We were working for ourselves, doing this scary, fun thing that pretty soon was getting a lot of attention and enthusiasm among readers and everything else. So it was, we had invented this thing that took a lot of work to do as we wanted to do it. It took the art directors a lot of work to do as they wanted, and the fact checkers and everybody. So it was a labor-intensive labor of love.
I was reminded of that one recently. I went back and reread the Funny Years, because that book did something to capture that same sense of layer after layer after layer of kind of editorial conception.
Well, and that kind of highly layered, fussed over, even mannerist version of a magazine that we did owed something to our childhoods as Mad magazine readers, right? I mean, there was about all
right.
those little, marginalia of that, together with having both kind of come of age to some degree at Time magazine and all the infographics and charts and stuff, and sort of doing that, but subverting it and doing it without a staff of 500.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So eventually you guys, I shouldn't say eventually, pre-launch, you hire Stephen Doyle, Drentel Doyle, to design the magazine. Had you and Graydon, or Graydon, highly visualized the magazine before Stephen came along?
Graydon certainly had a notion that it should have a classical and traditional look, because again, it was, how did magazines look in 1940? And certainly the logo in a certain way bears that out. But no, it wasn't as though then Stephen Doyle just showed us, no, it's this. As one does when you're an editor working with a very skilled and talented art director, you iteratively go back and have conversations about what there should be. And we realized that we wanted it to be dense and a little strange, a little singular. But because we did have a certain amount of, because it was this weird satirical edgy thing, right? We didn't want it necessarily to be, we liked the idea of it having a certain amount of traditionalism and rigor in various ways. In the end, the art direction was not traditional by any means. Although, there are these, drop cap flourishes, and there are bits of traditionalism within this sui generis madhouse of possibilities that Stephen and his successor, Alex Isley, invented.
I still find it hard to explain when I'm talking to a journalism class the impact that you guys had on the look of magazines. In the late 90s, I hired Drentel Doyle to redesign Inc. magazine. And when I went down to their studio and saw the first round of roughs, I swore, and Stephen can attest to this, that I could still see vestiges of Spy, and they looked as fresh then as they had a decade earlier.
Well, it did have an impact, and which was, again, no credit to us, except we made it a good magazine. But it was amazing to me, yes, 10, 20 years later, even today, when I see these funny charts with, silhouetted heads decorating them, I go, well, we invented that. And it did. And in a weird way, I jokingly say, well, we invented the internet or anticipated the internet. There's some anticipation in some of the things we did, these massive connect the dot charts and infographics. There was, because the internet came along while we were doing it, right after we stopped doing it, there was a certain amount of like, wow, we want some way to connect all these disparate things and have it delivered with this satiric sensibility. Well, I mean, the internet, so as it turned out, there was some kind of proto-internet-y quality to much of the graphic design, but just using old photos that, because they're dated and the models look funny because they're from the 60s or something. That was just brilliant art direction of that Stephen and again his other and Alex and others put in there. But that helped a lot too, right? The fact if it just been, if it looked like the Atlantic or Harper's or the New Yorker, but was the same thing, we wouldn't have had nearly.
No, I agree with that completely. They both happen to be alums of M & Company.
Yes.
Tibor Kalman's firm. And I'm curious, was that part of what attracted you to those guys? I mean, people forget just how sexy M & Company was back then. I don't think there's anything comparable right now.
Yeah. They're, in different ways along the way. Stefan Sagmeister has been,
Well, that's true. Yeah.
But no, Tibor and M & Company were an amazing thing during his efflorescence. It was extraordinary. No, we were not that, frankly, we were not that deep into the graphic design world yet. So we weren't part of the, didn't know Tibor. We're not part of the M & Company cult yet. But certainly as soon as we hired Stephen and Drentel Doyle and then saw, oh, man, here's a guy, in the case of Tibor, independently of us. We're in adjacent lanes, in many ways.
Yeah.
And the use of vernacular bits and pieces and the combination of the extreme freshness and mischievousness and all of it. Yeah, definitely. And then I became, fortunately, before he died in the 90s, he became one of my best friends.
It's interesting that when you think about all the talk about human-centered design these days, it puts how far ahead of his time Tibor was, not just in terms of his design style and his antics, but his values.
Yes, totally. And did it, he could be serious and he could be earnest and all that, but doing it in a kind of fun way,
Yeah.
and kind of, misbehaving in a serious way. I mean, he wasn't a yippie, right? He wasn't just like trying to tear it down for no good reason. He combined kind of virtuous intent with a sense of fun and glee,
Not unlike Spy.
Well, exactly. Well, which is, why once we finally, met and got along, we talked about starting magazines actually in the late 90s. We had a couple of different ideas for magazines we wanted to start.
And you guys were both eventually associated with Colors.
Well, he created it and I came in near the end to do it for a year and a half. But yeah.
This is going to sound like a random question, but I have to ask it. I spent most of my professional life kind of exploring and documenting entrepreneurship and creativity. And it's always struck me that many of the most original, edgy, fresh ideas emerge from environments characterized by resource scarcity. When you don't have capital, you have to invent. You have to be resourceful. You have to substitute ingenuity for financial capital. Was that true at Spy?
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you both in theory and in my experience of doing Spy. But we didn't have nothing, right? It wasn't a zine, right? We had $1.5 million, and then once at a crucial time when we were successful, but like didn't have enough money to just go on, we got another $1.5 million. And so, so $3 million in 1986, 87 is, as I say, what, 8, 9, 10 million maybe? That's a lot of money that we husbanded a lot. But yes, absolutely. I think that what I think is not that like the less money, the better, depending on what you're trying to do, but there is some optimal amount where it wasn't Condé Nast Portfolio, which it was a fine magazine, but I'm saying not a magazine where having all the money in the world necessarily helped it. Do you know?
Yeah. Well, at a certain point, too much money does become kind of toxic.
Yes, indeed. No, and we had more, and then we were making money, right? We were breaking even. So we had, like, at a certain point, I don't know, 88, 89, like, wow, we have enough money. We can do this. I mean, for instance, we spent, I would like to go back and look how much we spent on these incredibly expensive, mind-blowing computer, essentially what you can now do on Photoshop, like you can, my little kids can. We spent thousands of dollars to have a cover of Ted Kennedy having water thrown on him or whatever it was. And so we picked our places to spend a lot of money, right? It wasn't on, we didn't pay writers very much, and we didn't pay ourselves and our staff that much. But like, whoa, if we can do this amazingly realistic looking obviously fake photo cover, then let's spend $3,000 or whatever it took. But it was like literally a mainframe computer that was required to do these things we did.
On a more mundane level, I always used to wonder, how much did it cost you guys to put together the chart that documented every CAA client in Hollywood?
Well, that wasn't so much money as sheer sweat and blood and tears. That was, and for such a, and that's all it was, right? It was just this incredibly powerful, all-powerful Hollywood agency that was suddenly the force in Hollywood. There was no list of who they represented. So we thought, well, I'd like to see that. People would like to see that. So that was just a matter of just like a gazillion hours of very poorly paid, researchers just digging up in every way possible who were the actors and writers and directors they represented. And then we just published the name. That's all it was. It was just publishing the names on 2 or 3 pages. And that single thing, I think, as much or more than any of the regular monthly coverage, news story, column exposés we did of CAA, they were a real focus of ours. That completely freaked Mike Ovitz, who ran it, and them out. I mean, what? This is the secret we've been able to keep, and this little Pipsqueak magazine has exposed it.
I know.
It was it, and that really set them off, and what a pleasure that was for us to get such a rise out of these big, powerful grown-ups.
With a chart, a list.
Well, of course, charts. No, I mean, no, and I still I loved maps as a little kid, and I loved charts, and I did then, and I still do. But yes, indeed.
But it also displays a certain kind of editorial restraint. I could imagine other publications building an entire special issue around that. The Hollywood issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, indeed. Indeed. So, no, that's true that well, and again, in that sense, the person hours per square inch may have been, to your point, the maximum. I mean, I don't think of it as expensive, but of course, in some sense, it was.
It was, yeah.
Expensive. Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org.
So we've got to talk for a second about you and Graydon, because in a way you defied all the odds that about the conventional wisdom, which is you can't have co-editors, you can't have co-CEOs, you can't have co-directors.
Right.
It never, ever works. I know venture guys who basically say for them that's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Two guys come in and they can't answer the question, who's accountable, who's in charge here? And you did it. I love the quote. I think it was Graydon's who said, what was it here? Between the two of us, we make one great editor.
Yeah. No, it is. Again, in retrospect, it is amazing because, as you say, it wasn't. I mean, everybody says, no, you don't do that, and there was no precedent, right? We didn't. Oh, we can be like them, I mean, at that point, there weren't even like these brother director teams who made movies successfully, right? So, I don't know how we were extremely in every respect very complimentary, right? I mean, to Graydon's point, I mean, we were pals, but we are very different people, and we all have blind spots, and we pretty successfully covered for each other's blind spots, and we made each other laugh, right? We intrigued each other, we interested each other. It was a fun, buddy comedy partnership.
How'd you handle it if and when the two of you just had what might appear to be an irreconcilable difference? While we were doing the magazine, I literally can't remember any such thing. When we're in the startup period, there were some moments when there were, harsh words, and like, oh, should we raise the money from this? Whatever. I don't even remember what the arguments were about, but there were some moments, tough moments. Right.
And then when we were, selling it, there were some inevitable differences of opinion about how that should go or whatnot. But for the 5 years we were doing it together, I don't know. We had, through our fondness for each other and for what we were doing, we got along almost without exception.
That's really extraordinary. You two guys still close?
We're still pals. Yeah. I know we don't, go into the office together every day, but yeah, I still talk to him and communicate with him regularly. Yeah.
One of the things I find really interesting and remarkable about your career is not just the quality of what you produced, but that you produced creative work along a spectrum, from books, got to be one of the most, solo intensive creative projects imaginable, to a radio show, which is sort of in the middle of the spectrum, to magazines, which we've been talking about. I'm curious to hear kind of where your passions lie when it comes to actually doing the work for these different kinds of projects.
You're right. They are magazines and, everything but books in a certain way are highly collaborative enterprises. Doing Spy was intense and scary and kind of, I just felt like I was attached to some giant generator all the time. It was just like, not that it aged me, but it was just like intense. And having this team of people to do it with was such a delight. And frankly, because I've never been a natural reporter, I have done it, I can do it, but it isn't really my happy place. But having ideas for some outrageous story that I can just then ask somebody else or order somebody else to do, that was my ideal. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I liked that at New York Magazine as well, that I ran. And so I liked it. I think being a magazine editor, I had not been a magazine editor before we started Spy, and then I did New York, and then that was the end of that. I think 10 years of doing it, and a completely pleasurable 10 years of doing it, was about as much as I lucked out. Another way of the many that I've lucked out was that. It was like, yeah, I didn't have to, work my way up. I got to run 2 magazines, and then I was done. And that was fantastic. And I don't think I'm a great boss. I think I was an okay boss. I don't think I was a bad boss. But, managing people is not my favorite thing in the world to do.
Oh my God, tell me about it.
Hiring, firing, all that stuff. I was just, if you like the thing you're doing, that's, in my case, you put up with the managing of people. But so once I said, no, I'm the rest of my life. No, I didn't say the rest of my life. Now I'm going to write books and novels. I found, at least, and maybe that was a function of being, 44 when I started being a book writer mainly. I found myself temperamentally highly suited sitting alone in a room all day and doing that. Maybe because I had gotten the 10 years of incredibly intense collegial teamwork out of my system or something,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm curious. Indulge the print romantic in me for just a minute. What is it about a magazine, the effect that magazines seem to have on people that makes them so distinctive in that regard?
Yeah, it's funny you use the present tense. I guess that's still true. But, well, a bunch of things. I mean, certainly now in the digital age, the artifactual nature of them is lovely. But it was even before it when that wasn't a big deal because everything was physical. A well-made, and in some cases creatively ambitious object of magazines, and we did try to be physically creatively ambitious with foldouts and maps and bind-in tattoos and all kinds of stuff. I think that is appealing. But I think moreover, and again, what is lost pretty much entirely in the digital format is the sense of here is an authored thing, this thing of this week or this month or this quarter or whatever, that is all put together for some set of reasons, and the mix is chosen, and it's all made. It's a thing. It's not a bit of stuff floating in a sea of the internet. It's this thing that the editors, for better or worse, successfully or not, have chosen to put together in this way right now. Now that sounds like, well, yeah, but that doesn't exist anymore in terms of, and it can't exist in newspapers, even, physical or not. A newspaper has never been that because it's this daily thing. A magazine, again, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever, was exactly that. It was, what should we put together this week or this month to do this thing and give it this cool poster, as I always thought of covers, on the cover. So I think in that sense, from a reader's point of view, consumer's point of view, it's something more like reading a book, right? A book is a relationship. If it's a good book, it's this kind of intimate relationship with you and the author, and every word she or he chooses or every sentence and how they do it. Magazines have that in a way. Again, individual pieces can be as brilliant as ever online as they were in magazines, but it's the collection of them to some larger purpose or expression of sensibility or whatever a given magazine is trying to do.
So many people that I've grown up with, obviously magazine people, often look about, experience, particularly creating a magazine and say, that was the best job I ever had. There's something about that level of intense collaboration with an actual artifact at the end of the day, something tangible. You're going to hold it in your hand.
Totally. I found always that I and other editors and writers, whatever I knew, have different metabolisms, right? You can do a daily thing. You can do a quarterly thing. But or you can do a weekly, you can do a monthly. But I knew from early on, after my one day as a employee of the New York Daily News, that daily was not going to be my metabolism. It just wasn't. And weeklies are exciting, but a monthly back in the day when you didn't have the 24/7 gush of news on the internet and cable television, a monthly was possible in a way that, basically as soon as, not as soon as, but in the digital age, monthlies weren't the first to go necessarily, but they were the first to be rendered like, what? Why do we need a monthly magazine? There are still ways to do it, and there's still good monthlies, and they figure out ways to do it. But before the internet, a monthly was an opportunity to do a certain kind of thing that just, can't be done now. I mean, yes, The Atlantic does a brilliant job of being a monthly magazine, but it's all about the stuff they do every day. Do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, again, not to say, well, those times are gone forever, but they are. In addition to this more fundamental thing of, as we talked about, this authored object that the internet really just cannot provide.
I remember from the time I was relatively young, when monthly magazines would arrive in my house, and later when I was on my own in my apartment, when my favorite magazines arrived, it was an event.
Completely.
You have a glass of wine, you go to your favorite chair, you sit down, and
you light up the cigarette if you're me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we wouldn't even go there now.
Yeah.
And just sit there and you think, I'm going to spend time with my friends.
Exactly. And again, if you're like me, growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, and it was even true, we're reading DC Comics in Omaha from New York. It was like a connection to New York City, which is why as soon as I could, I moved there. So yes, it totally was. And again, that loops back to this feeling that I think both Graydon and I had when we decided to do this, was like, we want that. How do we create that again for ourselves and for people who share our whatever taste?
You guys started out kind of skewering the glitterati in New York, and then you became kind of celebrities yourselves in a way via Spy. Were there times when the two of you were together at an event or something and you looked at each other and said, "But not bad for kids from Canada and Nebraska"?
In the biopic, yes, we did that. I don't know if we ever literally did that. I mean, we certainly had a sense of how fortunate we were and how great this was as it was going on. I know I did, yes, we did not. We thoroughly indulged our ability to be excited at the time. Yes, and we knew at the time. I mean, Graydon used to say to these poor youngsters that we paid so little to, like, yeah, you're not paid very much, but I guarantee you this is going to be the best job you ever had. And many of them have subsequently said, now middle-aged people, of course, you're right. That was the best job I ever had. So yeah, we were totally like, we felt like, we had grabbed a bros ring.
Did you ever think to yourself whether the fact that you were outsiders in a way was a competitive advantage?
Yes, I would never call it a competitive advantage, but absolutely, I think. Yeah, and we maybe even, yes, we talked about that and we're aware of that. And I think, being, from Ottawa and Omaha and in the big city we'd seen movies about and TV shows about and dreamed of, and also being able to see all the weird outsized stuff about life in the big city and the big cities that we could see with the fresh, yokel, skeptical eye. It was this combination of loving it and, also but seeing the absurdities of it. And, I don't know, I guess pressing our nose against the glass and breaking the glass occasionally, something like that. But yeah, no, I think the outsiderdom is a big part of it. And I remember reading biographies of Harold Ross, founder of the New Yorker. And of course, he was from the middle of nowhere as well. So I think there is something to that. Yeah.
A lot of people who enjoy even a modest level of celebrity find that it's really toxic. There's a lot of talk in the culture these days about celebrity culture being toxic, but I'm talking about it from a different point of view. I'm talking about it in terms of the effect on the celebrities themselves. And I've always wondered, as I've watched your career evolve and Graydon's, whether at least for you, the way you kept your feet on the ground was through the pursuit of interesting work.
Yeah, and each of us has had a certain amount of whatever, notoriety, if not fame, but never, I don't think either of us we haven't turned it down, but we haven't, look at what we've done and how we've lived our lives. That hasn't been the driver. We haven't amped it up. We didn't fall for the modern American besetting sin of, fame is everything, and that's really all you want. And I can only speak for myself in saying yes to what you just said, which is, trying to be interested and stay interested and do good work. And yeah, and if you get paid well, or if you get praise, great, all that's good. And in my case, I know if it allows you, as it has allowed me, to do all these things that I had no natural credential or standing to do, like, oh, You've been a magazine editor. How, you want to host a radio show? Like, what? Yeah, sure. So, and at that point I was, writing books as well. And one of my thoughts at the time was, well, got this radio show. Everybody listens to public radio, buys books. Like, that's a good thing for an author to do. So in that ways, it wasn't like, I did have some consciousness of how to use the fact of having some degree of public profile for my own benefit. But again, whatever, because of how we were raised or where we were raised, I don't know who we are. We have not spent our time, either of us, and certainly being seekers of the limelight. Hey, Graydon especially. Graydon is, God knows, as editor of Vanity Fair. He could have. He was, if anything, the opposite of not seeking, trying to get interviews, trying to get photographed, all that stuff. Never at all.
This is going to sound like an offbeat question, but there's a serious purpose behind it. So I want you to imagine that you're sitting and having lunch with Laureen Powell-Jobs.
Okay.
And she passes across the table a check, a very, very, very large check, and says, you can use this, but you can use this only to create a print magazine. What would you do?
I don't know. It's a great question, and we'll have to go away for a day and come back if you want me to answer it with any seriousness. It's a great question, and I think I have never entertained that fantasy because I thought like my day editing magazines and the day of the print magazine is kind of done unless, you're some tiny little niche, fine boat building or whatever. If you had like $1 gazillion to create a print magazine, I have a feeling I could come up with some. I can't say, here's what I do, because if I had that, then I'd go to Ray Jobs and say, hey, give me $100 million. But no, it's funny. Like one idea, the last serious idea that I had, or we had, Tibor Kelman and I, back in 98 or something like that, was we wanted to buy Life magazine, which was a sort of existed, but barely at that time, and turn it into a modern turn of the century, 21st century pictorial weekly, like Life magazine as it could be today. So I don't know, could that be done in 2022? I don't know, but I can imagine, even though I have said to myself, to my wife, to everybody, like I'm done with Jobs. I can imagine that offer being, appealing enough. If those were the only constraints, here's $1 gazillion and it has to be a print magazine, I would spend a lot of time thinking about that.
I think it's an interesting way of exploring a question, which is, what is it that we as readers, as consumers, as a culture are missing as a result of obsolete magazine business models, sustainable business models?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I got to the answer of what we're missing before in describing why people liked and perhaps like print magazines is, they are like a fine boat, or like a beautiful house or something, that there is nothing else like them, because they are not quite a book, and they are certainly not an internet magazine. They're something else, and it is that sense of craftsmanship and a kind of coherence that can't be done any other way that I've seen. So it's a really interesting question. If you could just do it just to prove that it could be done and have beauty, usefulness, impact, all that would be fun to figure out.
Follow Kurt on Twitter @KBAndersen or visit his website, kurtandersen.com, for more information. His two most recent books, Evil Geniuses and Fantasyland, both New York Times bestsellers, remain relevant and even timely. Find them at your favorite bookseller. And if you want a little bit more spy, grab a copy of the beautifully designed, by our friend Alexander Isley, and richly detailed Spy: The Funny Years, which contains over 300 pages of Spy's funniest and most creative work, along with the ultimate insider's account of how it all came to be. If you'd like to connect more deeply with our guests, be sure to visit our website, where we have complete transcripts of all our interviews, along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and other great information. Visit longliveprint.co/interviews for more. Print is Dead, Long Live Print is a member of the Hub and Spoke Audio Collective, a nonprofit association of audio storytellers dedicated to promoting and sustaining high-quality independent podcasting, including the Peabody Award-winning Rumble Strip, the #1 podcast according to both The Atlantic and The New Yorker, who described it as a limitless podcast about life in Vermont. In each episode, host Erica Heilman invites herself into people's homes to find out what they know, hate, love, what they're afraid of, and what makes them more like you than you'd realize. These are the messy, obsessively crafted stories of the everyday. For more, visit rumblestripvermont.com or find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Print is dead, long live print is made possible by support of listeners like you. If you'd like to contribute to keeping the podcast going, there are 2 easy ways. 1, become a sustaining patron by making a monthly donation, or 2, make a one-time donation in the amount that works best for you. Visit printisdead.co/support for more information.
Print is Dead, Long Live Print is a production of Modus Operandi Design. For more information, visit our website, printisdead.co. Or if you're an optimist, longliveprint.co. Follow us on social media at PrintIsDeadPod. Please give us a like and a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. Thanks very much for listening.